Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. On today's show, I have a special guest, Myles Wakeham. Myles is an Australian who migrated to the US in 1989 and has since become a multi-millionaire, lives a 100% free and unconstrained life, no job, yet he's never graduated from high school, let alone went to college. He's a self-made business-focused technologist who was one of the early members of biotech company Amgen. He's a Bitcoin and rental real estate investor, spends 50% of his time in Arizona and 50% of his time roaming the world seeking out new opportunities. He hosts the Unconstrained podcast, in which he teaches the art of financial sustainability to his audience and has a book coming out on the subject as well. Myles, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So I'm looking forward to today's topic. With everything going on, everyone's kind of looking at their, just taking account of everything that they have going on, especially with their finances. And I think, that the topic that we're going to talk about, financial sustainability, I think it's definitely got a lot of people's interest right now. So maybe can you start off just giving us some background on what that is?
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that are trying to find a way to quit the workforce. I mean, I think that's kind of job one for many, many people. The unfortunate reality, I think, is that most people who ended up taking a career or a job or something like that, they kind of did it under duress. Most people, when they choose, for example, what they want to do in college, you're 18 years old. Your parents are just trying to make sure that you don't end up homeless and, you become a proud member of the family, but they don't know what is in your heart or in your passion or what you were born to be. That's kind of your job. Mm-hmm. The problem we've got is that in the United States, you're not even able to go and buy a beer at a bar in most states, and yet somebody puts $100,000 debt contract in front of you, says, sign this off, kid, and by the way, you can't discharge this in bankruptcy. So you better know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think if we all, as adults, look back and we realize who we were at the age of 18, I think there's nobody that I know who could say, yeah, I knew exactly who I was. I knew exactly what I wanted to be in life and what my value systems were and all of those things. You might have some inklings, a few little ideas, but if someone, as a business person, if someone was come to me and say, here's a business plan, we don't know what we're going to be, we know we need $100,000, would you invest in us? Well, of course I'm not going to do that, right?
Right.
But that's what the 18-year-old kid at the kitchen table is being asked to do. And as somebody who came from another country and didn't share the social mantra of what most of my friends here in the United States are dealing with, it was so foreign, it was alien, and it made no sense to me. I guess I went through maybe 20 years of looking at this going, I'm wrong. It's me, right? I mean, this is the biggest economy in the world. This is the United States of America. Surely they know what they're doing, right? But I'm still not convinced that I have the answer to that favorable. I know, look, people who want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an architect, or somebody like that, an engineer, somebody who needs actual tertiary skills that they can learn in a university environment, it makes absolute sense for them to project themselves through that and into a career. I get that. But most people aren't like that. Most people aren't doctors, lawyers, architects, accountants, and engineers. They're the average Joe working, in customer service at American Express, or they drive a truck, or that, these are the average people. And these people are still being given that same debt contract. Why is that kind of important? Well, what I learned in my background and how I kind of came into all of this was that you invest in yourself and you punt for the future you would hope will happen. So you kind of go ahead. What do the Canadians say? You skate where the puck is going. So because you need timing for everything to work so that you actually have something valuable to offer somebody. And at the end of the day, where I come from in Australia, we used to. I mean, I haven't been back for quite a while, but back when I was raised in business in the 80s, it was a free market. You had a skill, you sold it to somebody who needed it. They paid you the asking price based on how much they needed it and how well they valued what you were bringing to the table. That's how you made your money. And the thing is that what I learned when I was a kid, was that you better hold on to that money because it can disappear real fast. And I grew up in a time when taxation was at 50% and that interest rates were like 15%. And so nobody had debt. Nobody, if you bought a car, it was a used car that you learned to fix up yourself. We all took on personal responsibility. And I don't know. I don't know if it's a hard thing to say, but I got a feeling we were happier because nobody was stressed. You didn't reach out for things that you couldn't afford yet. You build up wealth. And I guess it's kind of an Austrian economics kind of theory, but the idea was that you bought assets. And most of my friends that I grew up with, they tried to buy a house and pay it off in 10 years. That was the mantra back then. I come to the United States and it's 30-year mortgages. 30 years. I mean, that's a long time.
Certainly is.
Yeah. And you know what the French literal translation of the word mortgage is?
What's that?
Death contract. Mort, death. People don't know that. They're entering into death contracts every single day. But we forget these things. And what happens is that we live in a world where people are burdened with more debt than they can handle. Their debt to income ratio is ridiculous. They can't ever pay this stuff off. And yet at the same time, they want to have their cake and eat it too. And that is, I don't want to have a job. I want to retire early. I want to get out of the rat race. Yeah, well, you bought that house, right? Or you took that student loan on. You got to get rid of that. So I started from the pretense. I was very lucky. I arrived in the United States with nothing, with a bag of clothes, no money, nothing. And I become a millionaire multiple times over because I won't take on debt unless the debt is going to serve me by allowing me to purchase assets. And my entire goal and the entire purpose of financial sustainability is to own assets that you live off the dividends of those assets. And that's a simple metaphor of looking at your burn rate, how much money it costs you to live, paring that way down. And rather than taking all of this extra money and saving it and putting it into capital markets or into the bank or bonds or whatever, what I do is I say, deploy it. Go and buy something that generates you a dividend, generates you income, and live on that income. And the second that the dividend or the income that comes from your assets exceeds your burn rate, you're done. You are financially free. You don't have to have $2 million in the bank and then say, oh, I'm going to live on a 4%, drawdown on this. That's insane. Because if you take yourself out of the game and you do everything based on capital acquisition or capital accumulation and then eventually draw down, that works really well if you're 65 years old. It does not work very well if you're 35 or 40.
Makes sense. Going back to when you came and going back to that 18-year-old that you mentioned earlier, how did they get started in this? And I get the struggle with taking on that enormous student loan. The payment on that student loan is like a mortgage and it's so burdensome and sets people back. But where do they go when they're 18? And like you said, no one knows what they want to do at 18. Well, how do they kind of make that decision of what's next?
The first thing you have to do is you have to look at the way you think and push away all of the social mantra that's being told to you by governments, tax authorities, banks, our economists, the media, even your parents to some degree. And you have to realize the basic things in the universe which will always be true, and that is entropy. You came from nothing, you will go to nothing. We all turn to dust eventually. That's the way the universe works. What I realized, and it took me a long time, took me decades and decades to work this out, was that in life, you can understand life a little easier by breaking it up into quarters. The first quarter, that would be, say, 1 to 20, those first years. You're under the umbrella of your parents. Your parents are effectively providing you food, shelter, clothing. I mean, basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs stuff. They're looking after your best interests. What's your job? Your job is to work out who you are, right? And to be able to project that forward. Because the second quarter of your life, I call that the building phase. You're going to be building a career, building a family, building a home, building wealth, building. And the one thing about building, if you talk to anybody in business, they will tell you if you want to start like a startup, you need capital. You need to be able to fund your venture. Most people at that age don't yet have the capital. Where do they get the capital? They borrow it. So they go into their building phase completely bogged down with debt. Then they get to the third quarter of their life, let's say the age 40 to 60, that period. I'll call that the consolidation optimization phase. At that point, you're hitting the midpoint of your life. You know that right down the end of it, you don't want to be dying as a burden on anybody else. So you're going to start investing. You're going to start trying to make things work for you. That's important, but it's very, very hard to do that when you've got 30-year mortgages and student loans and credit card debt and car payments all on your back, that somehow you've got to get past that before you can even start investing. That's your third quarter. And then your final quarter is your waning phase, when you know that your teeth are going to fall out and your eyes are going to go bad and your hips going to go bad. And this is, that 60 to 80 year period, something like that. And you just hope that, the end won't be all that painful and you'll get through it. Here's the problem. Most people live their life working until they get 65 or 67 for that last phase, when they don't have health and their biological clock's ticking and they can't enjoy the fruits of their labor. So going all the way back to that 18-year-old person that you were talking about, if that 18-year-old person has wisdom, and let's face it, at that age, few of us do, but if they can somehow summon wisdom to their world and they can say, I know what that endpoint might look like, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to be willing to defer a little bit of my partying and having a good old time, and I'm going to invest it in myself. So while I'm underneath the umbrella of the parents, I'm going to go out and work. I'm going to take money. I'm going to sock it away and save. And eventually I'm going to hit a certain point where I can invest it in assets that will benefit over time without me having to spend more than, say, 5 or 10% of my waking hours managing. And the key thing for me, the thing that turned it around for me with that, was rental real estate. The second I started buying real estate that was paying me rent and on 15-year mortgages, I had tenants paying off the debt, making me rich. And if I was to do that at the age of 18, by 33, you would own that property freehold, and the entire amount of rental income, less taxes, insurance, and so on, would go to you. And if you had enough of those properties, you would not ever have to work another day in your life. That's sustainability.
There's a movement out there right now called FIRE. So financially independent, retire early. How does financial sustainability relate to it? Is it the same thing? Is it similar, or is it something different?
It's kind of like we're on the same road, but we only traveled together for the first, 10, 20% of the journey. And then at that point, financial sustainability splits off one direction and FIRE splits off the other. I have criticism of FIRE. The first problem with it is that it's never been tested in a recession. Now, this is a movement which came about sometime in the, 2012 to 2014 period. There are very famous people in that community that almost created kind of a cult-like mentality to it. And that's not a bad thing. The whole point of FIRE, the thing where I do go along in the journey with them, is that it requires you to sort of adopt some level of extreme frugality. And then at some point, using the savings, the additional amount of money that you've got coming in from work, you would then take that money and you would invest it. Now, this is where I diverge. I agree with that as a starting point. For that 18-year-old kid, frugal means stay at home and live with your parents rent-free and earn a lot of money and save it. So I think we're on the same page there. The problem comes down to an understanding of how markets work and how cycles work. Because since the dawn of the FIRE movement, we've lived in a world in which equities, the stock market, is driven more by Federal Reserve intervention and interest rates than it is by company performance. If it was driven by company performance, that market would have tanked years ago, particularly with COVID. But it was because we have favorable support by the Federal Reserve by way of 0% money that all of a sudden assets appreciate in value, basic economic theory. So those in the FIRE movement who are high-fiving themselves because their Vanguard VTSAX fund just went up another 10 or 15% this year, and they're banking that it's been like that for the last 10 years. So surely at my ripe old age of, say, 35, I can predict out with a life expectancy of, say, 80, that for the next 45 years, it's going to be the same. I can continue to assume that I can quit my job now and live off the proceeds of everything I've saved for the rest of my life based on, say, a 4% drawdown rate or something like that, and I am going to be just fine. And that's where I kind of call BS on this, because this whole 4% thing, if you save up $1 million, that's $40,000 of annual income. You deduct from that tax, you probably got 30, maybe 28 or 30K to actual spend. You tell me who wants to live on that. If you embraced extreme frugality in the early stages to save up money to a sort of, like squirrels hold it away for the winter, well, that's fine. Except, do you want to be doing that for the rest of your life? Are you going to, maybe you want to buy that Lambo. Maybe you want to have that, buy that vacation property in St. Kitts. I mean, I don't know. Life is one of those unpredictable things. And I've been through hell and high water in life. I've almost been killed in car accidents. I've made millions. I've lost millions. I've had deaths in the family. I've had divorce. I've gone through all of it. I'm not an outlier. Most people will have similar experiences. But the naivety of the FIRE movement is that it's to say, well, we're going to put a flag in the sand right now, and the world as it is today will be the world it is in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years until the day we die. And I can guarantee 100% that ain't going to happen. That ain't going to happen. They're going to save up millions of dollars and then quit their job and go and live, with all their friends in the Bahamas. That sounds good until you get divorced and half your money disappears, or until you have some major health crisis and realize that you had to pay the health insurance because your boss, well, you don't have one anymore. There's no company provided health insurance. And, oh, by the way, they excluded that particular thing that you have. So now it's on you. So there goes your house. And it's like one thing after the other that I've seen in my life. And I've spent a life mitigating risk, dancing with risk, because that's life. Every day you get up is a risk. You could be hit by a car. You could be, a plane could fly into your house. I mean, this stuff doesn't happen every day. But look at the absolute patterns and what exacerbates risk. Federal Reserve intervention in the markets. We go through boom and bust cycles like crazy. We are way overdue for a recession. And if you're earning zero on your money, every time you try and draw down that 4% to live that, let's face it, frugal life, you're not keeping your assets in play here. And at the end of the day, I kind of think like the whole mantra of FIRE, the cult of FIRE, is to want to live like you're a pensioner on fixed income from the rest of your life. I wouldn't want to do that. That'd drive me crazy. I tell you what works for me, what makes sense to me is that you have time, which is a finite resource, and you spend that time wisely to understand who you are, what motivates you. And you then, having discovered those things, you take that and you do it in earnest. You do it with passion. You do it with power. You do it to the best of your abilities. You realize that you will get better the more you do something. And then one day you ask somebody for money to do that. See, that to me, that's a rich life. This whole FIRE thing is a cop-out. And so I'm not saying I'm completely against it, but I don't think that people who save up $1 million or $2 million based on current rates of inflation, based on the past history of boom and bust cycles, and when we realize Federal Reserve intervention will eventually get pulled back, and all of a sudden the markets will go south, that if you're banking your entire income career on that premise, it's a bridge too far for me.
We've been talking about, younger person maybe that, sets that this is financial sustainability is something they want to do and they set out on that path to it. But what about someone who's maybe not as young? Maybe they don't even have student loan debt, but maybe they don't have capital or assets. Are they just not able to do it, or do they have a path too, as well to financial sustainability?
I tell you what, I could give you the nice answer everyone would love to hear, and that's the answer that says, I'm 50 years old, I've got nothing saved for retirement, but there's still hope for me yet. I'm not going to lie to your audience. Okay, you're screwed. Mm-hmm. The bottom line is, when you were that 18-year-old kid, that's when you could have made the difference. And if there was anything that you can learn and take from life, is that you don't want to live it in regret. You don't want to squander an opportunity. It's so important that you understand that time is a dimension you cannot manipulate, and you have a finite number of years. If you want to try and do the best you can at that age, I guess I would sort of look at it and say, if I had 15 years of earning capability, I could probably amass enough money to be able to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. And that would be to buy real estate, and then leverage on the equity increase on the real estate to buy more real estate and kind of, scale it accordingly, and then have everything fall into 15-year mortgages, let the tenants pay it off. I'm good. But that's hard to do at 50. I mean, that's a risk that by 65, maybe, 67, when you get a pension or something, that maybe it'll play out. But at that age, do you want to be a landlord? Probably not.
Right.
I'll tell you what I think is the ultimate answer here, which is going to be weird. Move to a foreign country that's cheap. Like, I bought land in Mexico, in central Mexico, and I have a large, I guess you call it a compound that we're building down there. And I bought it based on the asset appreciation and proceeds from some of my rental properties. But my rental properties also paid my own home off. And now I have a plan B that allows me to straddle the border and operate and play geo arbitrage if I want on my costs. But the main reason I wanted to do that was because I don't trust the medical industry in the United States. And so having had major surgery in Mexico and understanding the way that the private health system works down there, it was a preference for me to be able to spend as much time down there as a resident. So I became a permanent resident of Mexico. So I've got Australian passport, US passport, permanent resident in Mexico. I'm off to Antigua next year to do it there too. At the end of the day, I want to live a life where I can bumble around the world and take advantage of the opportunities that are there. But I realize along the way, I've met so many expats who live in Mexico. They live in towns like Ajijic or San Miguel de Allende or Puerto Vallarta or somewhere like that. And they live for $1,500 a month in a way that is equal to their Social Security income. So somebody who has no money saved, there may be hope, but you're going to have to look at where. So if you wanted to do that and you don't have anything saved, my advice, go to Mexico. If you don't want to do that because you know, that's a bridge too far for many, then you're going to have to hope that at an early enough age that you started to sock away money. Now, the one thing I'll agree with the FIRE move is that if your end point is 65 years, you know, quit your job, got all this money socked away, and you need that money to last you to the rest of your life, and you've socked away, let's say, $1 million, you're probably okay. You're probably able to draw down on that and you'll live a decent life with dignity. That's fine. But if you didn't do that and you've left it this late, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I don't have any happy stories other than go down to Mexico. It's pretty decent down there.
You know, the approach, like you mentioned earlier, is that what people should look at is figure out what their burn rate is, what their expenses are. And then as long as their assets are generating positive over that, they're good to go.
I think so. I would say that life isn't all about money. And when we look at it as the human experience, I think that it's really important that we realize that we have to live synergistically with the universe and that we have a finite life expectancy. And that the most important thing that we can all remember is on our deathbeds, we don't want to be looking back and saying, gee, I wish I had more money in the bank. That's stupid, right?
Right.
You can't squander the opportunities of life, travel, family, important, memorable moments, the things that make us human. We're not banking machines. We're not stocks. We are human beings. And if we embrace that and we try and maximize our passion and our enjoyment, what actually happens, and I don't understand why, but it kind of does, everything else seems to kind of fall into place. I have a good friend of mine who is a podcaster. His name's Gary Collins. And he has a podcast he calls The Simple Life. And Gary and I are, you know, pretty close. And he has something which I think really helps to understand. He calls it the three-legged stool. It's a balance between health, purpose, and money. And if those three things are kept in, you know, equal amount of attention to every one of those, you're going to do just fine. You don't need to have millions of dollars. If you have all those three things, at least you're putting equal attention into them because you can find a way. And that's the beauty about humans. We're pretty tenacious, stubborn. We find a way. If we sit back thinking that the world's out to get us and that there's no hope for us and we stall and we do nothing, well, you know, that's not going to work. Here's the weird thing. I haven't had a job for 25 years. I'd probably drive my wife crazy, bumming around the house, doing nothing. Well, I don't do nothing. I'm extremely busy. I've got a lot of business ventures and projects and crazy ideas of things I'm going to do and things I am doing. So that doesn't really happen. But what I do have is the ability to sit down in the morning with a cup of coffee, sit outside, weather permitting, and to think. And that was the greatest gift of having financial independence, is the ability to think and to think through and transcend all of the distractions that we all have to deal with. And the one thing I discovered recently, which I thought, well, this is obvious, but why didn't I know this when I was a kid, is that when you understand entropy, and that is everything in the universe will eventually turn to dust, you realize that the human experience has two key things that you can do that promotes what I would call inner happiness. And it all is to do with combating entropy. It doesn't matter whether you're 15 years old or you're 50 or you're 80. It's all the same. There's only two things in the world you can do to combat entropy. One is you can attend to things. That is, you manage things, you clean things up, It's why people who retire often go and buy an old classic muscle car and they want to restore it and bring it back to life again. They're openly demonstrating this need to combat entropy because it makes them happy, right? It becomes the desirable thing they want to do when they have time. But there's something even bigger than that. And that's the other thing that combats entropy, and that's called creation. You see, we as humans, we create things by our nature. The most important thing that we'd all probably agree on that is the ultimate creation is to have a kid, is to have a baby. We are directly sticking our middle finger up to entropy when we do that. And that's why when people look at a baby, they look at something young, they look at something new, they plant, in their garden. These are demonstrations of our ability to want to combat entropy and create, and it makes us happy. And so why is that important? Because that 18-year-old kid who doesn't know who they are right now, if they just understood that and they narrowed down all of their focus to things that were either to attend to things that they care about or to create new things, they would probably have a pretty good chance of having a happy life.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. Myles, thank you for being on the show. Gave us some great information, some motivation, inspiring on how to get to achieve financial sustainability. How best can someone reach out to you, find out more information about you?
Well, everything I do and my ramblings and our community, that we have a community behind this stuff now, which is crazy, can be found over at our website at beunconstrained.com. So that's the one-stop shopping experience for everything I do, from our podcast to my articles and teachings and courses and all that stuff.
Perfect. We'll link to that in the show notes. And thanks again for being on. And thanks everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.